And we're off. So welcome this evening, to everybody formally, to the Grow Project's 7-Day Business Fuel Challenge. I am the CEO and founder of the Grow Project, a business training and coaching program which looks at the performance of individuals within businesses, and particularly those that wish to have a life and a business, and especially those amazing women who want to grow businesses and babies at the same time. Lyn Worsley I have known for a long time, and we often joke we can't actually decide who's coaching who at times, so that's a bit of a giggle for us, both being talented business women, if I do say so myself. Lyn, of course, is a clinical psychologist, also a registered nurse, the creator of the Resilience Doughnut, which we're going to chat about this evening, and the creator and director of the Resilience Centre and Alpha Psychology. Welcome, Lyn, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Wonderful.
Now, with the Grow Project, we talk about psychology quite a lot. We talk about mindset. We talk about the power of mindset. We draw examples from the sports sector. We draw examples from military. We draw examples from all the different sides of psychology. So we talk about the Freudian side. We talk about the Jungian side. And I'm completely fascinated by the ability that psychology has to fuel us, to absolutely wipe us out, and the power of all that goes on in that space. So this evening I'd like to start off with a really simple one. You are a clinical psychologist, and I'd love you to tell me what clinical psychology is.
Okay, well, psychology, particularly in Australia and the US and in UK, are divided up into various specialty areas. So you can be a psychologist and a registered psychologist, usually with your organisation in the country that you're in. So in Australia, we have an organisation called APRA, which is the Australian Allied Health organisation, and we also are registered with APS, which is the Australian Psychological Society. In those organisations, there are specialty areas, and so some of them might be forensic psychology, might be counselling psychology, might be education developmental psychology, and one of the areas is clinical psychology. And the difference between the clinical psychology and the others is very, very small. Sometimes I just think it's some people's way of making them feel really important by having a clinical in the front of their title, because I certainly have people that work with me in the practice who I would be going to for advice, given that they have specialties in other areas and they don't have a clinical title. But in order to get the clinical title, I've had to do an additional 2 years post registration masters. And that 2 years is particularly focused on clinical problems that are about in psychology. And so that might be a clinical presentation is a bit more difficult than someone with depression, anxiety. It might be a clinical situation, maybe personality disorders, schizophrenia, dissociative disorders. So a lot of those disorders are put into the clinical category. And generally you'll see people who have, hospitalizations over time and have a long-term mental illness that becomes a clinical presentation. And so a clinical psychologist is trained particularly in that area. But that being said, there are many clinical psychologists who come straight out of university and have done their 4-year degree and then have gone straight to do their clinical masters, and they also have had no experience with anybody of the clinical case unless they've just had their placements. So it's a good term to know that someone's done a 2-year masters. Is really about the only thing that you can say, but it does attract in Australia a higher rebate for Medicare. And so to be really cynical, people are really after it for the higher rebate. Does that answer that question?
It does. And you and I often, we talk about psychology, we talk about business, we talk about all of your team that you have there at the Resilience Centre, and we talk about parents, we talk about children, we talk about sociology, and we just go where it needs to go. I just wanted to start with that. And the next thing I'd love you to tell us a bit about is the type of people, particularly in the business leaders and owners kind of space that you work with. And specifically, I'd love to hear about 3 of the key challenges you find that some of the smartest business minds in Australia are facing at the moment.
So 2 parts of the question. So the people that I'm working with at the moment are organisations. I might work with a number of organisations to actually help them to, I guess, have a vision of where they're going and looking at the key areas of strength, and to give them a language of strength-based and solution-focused approach. And in that language, it's about helping people to think in a way that is like a growth mindset, or a mindset towards a future or towards the vision that they have, and helping them to make decisions that keep them on that page with that vision. And in organisations, oftentimes it's a bit of a top-down, bottom-up approach where you actually meet in the middle. The top-down is actually getting those people who are the directors or the managers in the business to be really in touch with the vision and learn how to communicate the vision in a positive and solution-focused way, but also helping the people on the ground to be in touch with the vision and know why they're doing what they're doing, and have a language that they can use between them to help other people to stay on board. So essentially it's keeping people on the same page, but using a language of what's working rather than not working. So that's how I'm working, and the organisations that I work with. Some of the organisations are schools. Some of the organisations are, factories, organisations that are making things. I've worked with some people in the fashion industry. I've also worked with people with small businesses and helping them to work out how to build their business and actually get it started. And from a psychological perspective, I think one of the key areas that I work, and I'm not necessarily a business guru. I think probably I'm a resilience guru. I tend to work with how do you work with businesses that are going to survive and thrive and still have a legacy that's there in 100 years' time, which then it means that we start thinking really differently rather than we just want to try and get enough money to pay the mortgage this week. So I think my way of working is much more in tune with a personal principle of your own personal value system and helping you to align that, which is why I think there's so much synchronicity between the Resilience Doughnut and the Grow Project.
Absolutely. And I think those skills that you really build with people is what really helps executives. And the resilience concept, as you've explained it to me, and as I mentioned in my book, was something which really surprised me in terms of certain aspects, which I'll draw out if you don't already. But I would just love to jump to, you are a resilience expert. You speak around the world on that. You teach others about resilience. You've you've got 2 books on resilience. It's one focused in the adult space and one focused in the how we build it in our children's space. And you do amazing things with it around the world and teaching others about it. So let's start with, what is resilience?
Okay, resilience isn't something you have at any point in time. It isn't a personality trait, so that's telling you what it's not. And it's not something that you're born with. Okay, so quite often it's misused, the term resilience, and it doesn't refer to somebody who just bounces back. It actually refers to a whole lot of processes. So somebody who is resilient, or an organisation that is resilient, you will refer to the processes that are around them. So resilience is 3 things. The first one is that's the development of personal competence. So if you're looking at it as an individual, it's the continual development of competence. It's that process that develops skills and ideas and activities that you're able to do in order to keep yourself buoyant. And that's your personal competence. Most often it's about our social competence. So that's the first one. The second part is that resilience is you're developing your personal competence, but in the process of gathering resources. So your personal competence is not about you individually, it's your personal competence in being able to activate the right resources at the right time. So someone who is resilient will be able to put their hand up and go, oh, I'm struggling. I know who I can get to help me, and the person that I get to help me is the right person. Someone who isn't resilient will inevitably not have enough of the social skills to choose the right person at the right time. Okay? The third part of resilience is that they are going through adversity, or they have adversity, and in that adversity they have that process of having trouble, going down, not coping real well, and then having the experience of coming back up, having gotten the resources that they need in order to cope. So when we're talking about resilience, we're talking about three aspects, the interaction of those three. So the building of your competence, the grabbing the right resources and gathering those as you go, and going through adversity.
And one of the things that blew me away the most about resilience was when not only that, I guess what you were saying about it's not just about the ability to bounce back. It was that resilience is not about necessarily having all the balls, not having multiple balls up in the air. In fact, multiple balls up in the air can be a positive thing, but it's actually about keeping those balls spinning. Can you chat a little bit about that? Because many people on the line would have many balls up in the air.
Yeah, and really people who are resilient or survive and thrive tend to have more balls in the air anyway, but it's the certain balls that they have and whether they're connected that means that they work. So you can juggle a whole lot of things, but they may not be related, and that's a bit like, you know, you're juggling the balls, but if one's way over in one direction and one's way in another direction, they're not going to be related. You're not likely to be able to manage that. It's when the balls are in the air that they're connected that you actually see that it's easy to juggle. So resilience is more like that you have the balls in the air, but you're able to have a whole lot in the air because you've got people to support you and help you in doing that. And it's not necessarily helping them, them helping you. It's also the fact that there's an interaction with them as well.
So I would love to translate that now into the Resilience Doughnut and to explain to us what the doughnut is, why you created it, and what is a doughnut moment.
Okay. So the Resilience Doughnut, I don't know if you can see on my little blab on my Twitter thing, you can see that circle. Yeah. So circle has got, it's a donut. That's why it's called the Resilience Doughnut. In the middle part of the circle, that's where you are. Okay, so think about you, Rebecca. You're in the middle, and inside you have three things that you would say to yourself. You'd say, I have people to help me cope. I'm a nice person, so I am a nice person. And you would also say, I can do things to change my circumstances. And you get those messages and you gather those messages over your lifetime. Some of them you might say, I haven't, I'm not, and I can't. But if you're resilient, you'll have more of the I have, I am, and I can than you have of the negative ones. Now, in those messages, you've actually had 7 areas of your life that have contributed to building those messages. Those 7 areas are represented by the outside part of the donut and the colours. Those 7 areas for an adult are a partner, and I just like to say you don't need all 7. You only need 3. So not everyone has a partner, not everyone has a good partner. So it's not necessarily that that's going to be your area of strength. Another one would be skills, and you might have something that you can go, yes, I can do that. It might be simply just going to the gym and working out for an hour. You know, it's pretty good to work out for an hour, but you know. The third one is family. It may be your immediate family, it may be your children, it may be your grandparents, it might be your parents. The next one is your education. It may be your experience of learning and your ability to take on new information. The next one is your friends, maybe a whole lot of age group of friends, but friends that are that you're able to sort of meet up with and who are actually be able to give you some home truths. The sixth one is a community. It may be a faith community, and those people who are connected by a faith community with a value system tend to be more connected and have more donut moments than others, and tend to have a better longevity in terms of bouncing back from illnesses. But it's not necessarily a faith community. It may be a community where there's a wide range of ages that have a connection. The seventh one is work. So it's where you're able to have a sense of belonging and share that your work is valued, or your place in the workplace is valued. That could be volunteer or paid work. So those 7 areas contribute to building the I have, I am, and I can. And when you have 3 of those areas in place, you have what you call a donut moment, if they all connect at the one time. So when you have 3 areas, it's a bit like a 3-legged stool. You've got 3 areas that you can sit on. On a stool, you can sit on 3 legs. If one falls out, it collapses. If you're only pivoting on one strength, it's not going to last for very long. So the whole idea is that we actually find 3 areas of our lives that are strong, and we nurture them. You don't say, oh, the other 4 aren't doing very well, and then we'll build those up. You don't do that at all. You go, okay, these are my 3 areas of strength, and so I'm going to do something with those 3 areas. And when you do that, you find that you flourish really, really well. And if you happen to be able to be really clever and put the 3 areas all at once together, like I did on the weekend, you have a donut moment, and you absolutely flood yourself with, I have people that help me cope. I am a really good person, and I can do things to change my circumstance, and I'm doing really well, and I feel like I can power on tomorrow, or I've got new ideas that I'm able to reflect with other people. Or the areas that aren't going so well in my life, you know what? They don't seem to have such a big impact on me as much as they did before, and I'm able to cope with them or let them be water off a duck's back. So what we do when we're working with individuals is we help them to find where those 3 areas of strength are. And generally, if I'm finding that I'm working with someone in a clinical case, as I talked about as a clinician, might be finding somebody who is really not coping and has signs of mental illness, then what I will give them is a donut moment homework per day. And if they're not able to activate it, I'll get their nurse or their partner or whoever's caring for them to also activate it. And when they're able to do that, it's actually been shown that they need less medication and they recover faster. So a donut moment, again, it could be an activity where you link the 3. Just having 3 strengths in place will mean that you're more buoyant. If you're able to do that on a daily basis in your workplace, that's gold.
So tell me what it feels like. You alluded to it before. But tell me what it feels like when you have a donut moment.
Okay, I'll tell you about my donut moment on the weekend.
Yep.
Rebecca, you would know that I've just moved house, and we are not far from the water. So my son came over, so that's my family factor. My husband was there, so that's my partner factor, and we have a kayak. Well, just one kayak, and only one person can fit in it at the one time. But the fact that we're all carrying that down to the water and having this, amazing time where we were able to trial out where we could put the kayak in and where we're able to get this organised, and the excitement on everyone. Oh, let me have a go. I mean, it was pretty fun. And so we're paddling around, and it was only a little thing, like it wasn't massive. And that was a donut moment. Another aspect of the donut moment was watching my sons and my husband putting up a shed on the weekend. And that's like a barn raising. So, somebody else calls in and they all hold a hammer, and somebody else calls in. And so there's a bit of a community happening. And then there's, the friends thing happening, and then the family thing happening. And it happened to be skill as well. So it's probably more than a donut moment. But that is the barn raising essentially became, I could fly. Like getting into work this morning, I was just pumping. I could feel like my brain is much sharper. I feel like I'm able to tackle issues a little bit quicker. I knock over a few letters. I can knock over a report much quicker. And I'm much more present with people because I'm not trying to get anything from them for my own self-esteem. I'm able to give a lot more because I've just been fueled up. I've just had time where I've been able to flood myself with, I have people who care for me and that I'm able to call on when I need some help. And I am a nice person because they come over and they tell me those things. And I can do things to change my circumstance. I can kayak, I can help build a shed, I can do a whole lot of stuff. And I feel good about that.
So one of the things you and I have discussed about is what it feels like when it's not a donut moment, and perhaps when there's two pieces in play and it just kind of feels a bit weird in the stomach. Something's just not quite there. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, and oftentimes that's when, as adults, we go through transitions, and a really big one is having babies. So women in particular, because we're the baby machines, we go through a number of transitions in our life that men don't seem to go through. And that, at my age, is something that is well worth having. But as you go through it, it's hard because your identity has changed. Your 3 areas of strength, which you may have had when you were working in an organization and your friends were there, and then you could have your donut moment by going out for a beer after work. And you take a little while to come home because you might go to a show or you might do something that makes you feel like you're really accomplished, and you get a good pay packet at the end of it. You then go to a point where you're going to have a baby, you take some time off maternity leave, and your identity is completely changed. You have, a child, so that you now got a family factor, but that wasn't your strong thing before, and your friends are all at work, and the new friends only want to talk about, poo and bottles and breastfeeding, and you just really want to talk about something else. And your husband's working his butt off because, at the moment there's only one wage coming in. So, he's not going to be home that often. And so you've got this sort of pivoting time where you haven't got the strengths that you really want to have, and you just want to go back to work because it's much easier. So that's where you call a transition time. And that's, if you know about the donut, if you can actually activate 3 areas of strength very quickly, it may not be the same strengths that you had before. There will be some loss, but if you've got those 3 happening at once, then you actually can cope a lot better. And that's why getting a walking group or something with some other mums who are also having, in the same situation, going to a play group and playing with the kids and organising craft and stuff with other mums at the same time, or dads, whoever's home with the kids. That becomes, it's a community. That's a community factor. It's a friends factor, and it's also a family factor. It's sure it may not be as exciting as going to work and running some great projects, but it's at least a beginning stage of what you can do. So in that stage, what you've got is a donut moment starting to occur. If you don't do those things, if you sit there and say, they're just not my sort of people, I can't do this, I don't want to do that because they're too hard, or, I really don't get on with those people, you just have to persevere. The answer is not just to go back to work and put the child in childcare. The answer is not that, because essentially what you're doing is you're going back to your previous donut moment. What you need to do is to actually renegotiate the new one, to incorporate the child or the family factor. And when you're my age, you'll have done a lot of donut changes and become better at, how do I put down those roots quickly? How do I get those 3 legs in the or 3 factors in the donut going? When there's only 2, you'll start to find sometimes that you're pivoting. Things don't feel quite right. You'll do something that, I should have felt good after that yoga session this morning. And I don't know why I didn't feel good after. I usually feel good after it. And oftentimes it might be that you've gone to the yoga session, but you haven't caught up with the friend that you normally catch up with, or you raced off afterwards because you had something else to pick up, but it was a bit more of a disconnect. And sometimes it's that notion of really taking stock of, when I am feeling good, there must be 3 things in play here. Which are the 3 things that are in play? And when you see that, you've had a donut moment. When you can see that you're not quite got it, it might be a case of, well, you know what? I'm going to have to take time to actually have that coffee with her afterwards or him afterwards. And I need to make sure that I do have a connection point. Or I'm going to call in to see my mum on the way home and see my brother on the way home, and maybe share stories about how we're going with our kids. Those are things that actually give you that sense of, yeah, I can do this. I've got some people here that help me. Oh, yes, I'm doing okay.
And why did you create the donut?
It's a good question. Actually, the beginning of it was I was really angry. I given a gig to talk to a whole lot of family lawyers, and the gig that I was given was that they wanted me to address, from a psychological perspective, the value of fathers, and it made me really angry. One, that they should even ask the question. And as lawyers often do, they tend to think, and I'm not being nasty here, it's just a thinking pattern. They tend to think a bit more cause and effect. If we can put a value on parents, on which parent is more important than the other, then we're able to put some money towards that, blah, blah, and so on. And it made me so angry that I was asked into this, when from a psychological perspective, all I could see was that there is an interaction between mothers and fathers and grandparents and so on. And it wasn't one more important than the other. And my work in youth work and in early childhood, and also from a nursing perspective, was that there are multiple factors that build a child's resilience. And so I went to the gig and I didn't address the topic at all. They presented the topic and I got up and I said, let me tell you about what makes a child resilient in life. Let me tell you what builds their resilience. So I picked up the research and I'd put together the model at that time, and I'd drawn this sort of model in a circle and just had a little sort of a graphic that was very homemade at that point. And it got a standing ovation, apart from the fact that I think the room was filled of male solicitors who were going, please tell us that we're valuable. But I'd given also at the end of that just a series of pictures. And that year my husband and I had both been on about 7 different camps, both as house parents at the camps, for various schools that our kids were in, youth camps and we're also, because we're both dealing with, he's a principal in a school, so we were coming along as support people at these schools. And I had taken my camera and taken photos of kids interacting with their dads, with their mums, with their grandparents, with their carers, with, you name it. And just gave this PowerPoint of, that Cats in the Cradle song.
Yeah.
I just want to be like you, Dad. It was great. And at the end of that was just a little boy watching his dad pulling a motorbike apart. And it just, it was that whole sort of moment where everyone went, oh my goodness, there are so many more factors in here. And if someone doesn't have a dad, it's not the end of the world. If someone doesn't have a mum, it's not the end of the world. There are other factors, but we all need to be part of this. And we need to see the value of the factors that are there for a child. And not start saying one's more important than the other. So that's how the donut started. From then, I'd been given a lot of gigs to come and present the same material. And so I thought, I better actually turn this into something that's a bit more feasible, and actually get some decent research going with it. So I have actually researched it, and now it's a validated tool. It can be used as a measure. It's validated with a number of other intervention studies as well, and over time I think what's happened is that schools have picked it up and are using it in the school, and we now have a, a resilience report that uses the measure online with other measures to actually give someone back their strength report. So it's pretty exciting actually being part of it. Even though I started it, I'm now part of a team who also keep that going. And we've got a number of donut trainers around the world who are donutting. We call them donutters.
I love it. I think it is an incredibly valuable tool, Lyn, and I always take my hat off to people who've been able to take something that is incredibly complex, has a lot of elements, and make it a simple tool that people can use on a day-to-day basis. And also then that is out what you're teaching, and you allow people to bring awareness to something as to why they might just have that feeling that's a bit missing, or there's a piece around identity, and actually here's something that it can do for you. I do have a question here, and then I have another question for my of my own in relation to it. It says that so donut moments are transitionary, not long term. Is this the case?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Thank you. Yes and no. So I want you to think about yourselves as old people in a nursing home, because one day you might be there, and sitting there as an old person in a nursing home in the corner, and your memories are coming back to you. And as your memories are coming back to you, the more memories that are donut moments will make you more buoyant, will give you those sort of lightened times. And for people, and this has been proven, that people who age well, those people, those elderly people, and I interviewed probably about 5 people over 90 who had been through significant adversity. It wasn't just that they were, nice, well-kept, old people who, been preserved well. It was these ones had significant adversity in their lives. And what had helped them through, I asked them, and they said, they'd had, one woman was a matron in several hospitals, another woman had walking group and historical societies, and she'd managed to still been able to pull people together. All of them had commented about the connections that they'd had, and they were almost like in sync. And they'd had memories laid down, many stories to tell. And when I was a young nurse, before I'd even done my general nursing, I worked in a nursing home, and I used to go and sit on the beds with the patients and put the curtains around and put my legs up so no one could see that I was in there, and ask them about what it is that tell me some stories from when you were a little girl, or tell me some stories of things that were going. So I want you to imagine yourselves as that, and you have a bank of memories, a bank of stories to tell. That means your donut moments that you have, which are short-term and transitionary, they just give you that buoyant time to help you to be buoyant, but they also lay down a lot of neurons, because for 3 factors to be occurring at once, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in here that lays down I have, I am, and I can, and it puts you into a place where you can hold on to those memories for later. The other question, is it like mindfulness? No. Mindfulness is a little bit like mindlessness, or mind just focusing on what's just in front of you. A donut moment is almost like the opposite. It's like an experience where you have a whole lot of things in sync. And when those things are in sync, you're flooded with I have, I am, and I can. And you don't know necessarily that they're actually happening. It's just that they lay down a whole lot of stuff for you. Mindfulness is this beautiful, beautiful exercise where you're able to zone your whole body down and stop having so many palpitations, and move yourself into a zone where you can experience the mind or the moment. But a donut moment is like, lots of things happening. I'm busy. I'm juggling those balls. I'm doing a whole lot of things at once, and they're in sync. They seem to be in sync with my values, and I like that.
And one of the other things I'd like to pick up on is what you mentioned about those amazingly resilient people that you met in the nursing home, and how they had faced adversity. And there's 2 parts I'd like to pick up on. you've mentioned earlier kind of the tribe or the village of, that theme of the village to raise a child kind of came in. But the adversity thing, I think, is something that's very interesting, because I think when you're skilled by people like yourself, I find when I'm skilled by people such as yourself to understand human development, it's not necessarily wrapping children in cotton wool, which actually makes them a thriving individual. So I guess if you could just chat about how you see what an opportunity perhaps adversity can be, or that perhaps those children that we're parenting, what those challenges that they face, what the opportunity is there, because I don't think it's necessarily the way people think about things.
No, that's right. And as the last, hang on, I'll start from when I first started working in childcare. My experience as a registered nurse took me into early childhood very much in the beginning. And I ran a number of childcare centres before they had childcare workers. There wasn't enough childcare workers, so they used nurses to do that. So I had this great honour to do that. And then I studied early childhood and I studied psychology. But in that process, we had a real change in our parenting style. So we'd gone from children in the 70s, to be, almost a little bit, hippie-like. They were able to sort of, be part of the crowd. It was sort of a group mentality in the way you raised a child. And then into the 80s and the 90s, we started to become more focused on the child as the centre. And then we've moved into the noughties and the teens, and we're now become overly protective. So when we had this child as the centre, it was more like we had an experience of children being the centre of everything. So individual plans for in childcare and so on, everyone had to sort of consider how we danced around this child. Well, that has the risk of raising a narcissistic child. Runs the risk of that child being, it's all about me and so on. And then we go into this next phase where we've got to protect them, and everything is, like a trampoline. If you saw the number of times I nearly broke my nose and my arm on those trampolines, it was my adversity. You learned how to jump. Now we can bounce across the edges because we've got walls up on trampolines. We don't want to. You don't want the teacher. In some schools, we're experiencing that the teachers are too scared to push children too hard because their parents might sue, because the kids will get upset and say that they're being picked on, when in actual fact that child needs to have an experience of some adversities, and they need to develop the skills to cope with difficult teachers and difficult people in their life. So we need to move our child rearing to another phase, and that new phase needs to be preparing for life, not protecting from life. That needs to be able to give them experiences where they have the adversity and they have the difficulties and they have times where things don't go the way they want, and they do experience a teacher that they don't like, or they have a teacher who may not be terribly pleasant to be with. But you know what? That's going to help them later on in life to deal with a boss that's not so good to deal with, and they learn those skills. So when we talk about adversity in childhood, we're not going to try and, put them on the railway tracks and help them to get off. What we're going to do is provide an environment where they're able to cope with disappointment, and also we're going to not manage children. When you manage children, you give them an iPad when you take them to a restaurant because it keeps them quiet. When you raise children, you take them to a place where the restaurant, they may not be bored, and that's okay. They're going to have to cope with that boredom. They're going to have to learn how to be polite when they have to listen to adult conversation and it's not that interesting. They're going to have to sit there and learn that, and it's going to be hard for those parents who are dealing with that, because the parents, are going to be a bit put out for a while. But they need to teach their children how to use a knife and fork, how to sit in a restaurant, how to talk to people, how to keep an eye contact, because we know with resilience, it's about those social skills and the ability to cope and wait and not have immediate gratification that actually helps them into the future of the skills that they need for life. And so preparing for adversity, and knowing that adversity is inevitable for your children, knowing that they're going to sit there and be upset because somebody didn't play with them or they didn't get invited to a party, and sitting there with them and going, that's horrible. Isn't that nasty of that person to do that to you? Well, let's see if you can learn from that and maybe make sure you don't do it back to them, because that would be awful to do something nasty to someone like that. And yes, that's disappointing, but, you know, I'm not going to rescue you, and I'm not going to ring up the mum and say, oh, look, you know, I'll pay for the ticket. Can they come too? I'm not going to say, oh, well, we won't invite them to that party because, you know, they're not your friend anymore. We're actually going to go through in a way of helping them to understand what it feels like for life, so that they learn the skills that they can be better people later on.
And I think it gives really the opportunity to have conversations and to talk about these things and create the space to talk about these different things that happen. And I just love it as such a different way of thinking about things. And as you say, rather than jumping in and have the victim rescuer scenario, actually see it as an opportunity to build resilience and build those coping skills, which I just feel is such a gift to be able to give to our children. And that differentiation that you mentioned between managing children and raising children, I think is another probably entire discussion that you and I would enjoy having immensely. But probably not one for this evening. I would love to just switch pace a little. I'll just check this. I would like to, yep. Just sorry, I was just checking in the chat box. If you do have a question, please just pop it in the chat box. That would be wonderful. If you put /Q, we'll be able to draw it to our attention. Lyn, I would just love to know, what are your top 5 fuel sources? You run an international speaking and training program. You're off to, is it Ireland and the UK?
Off to Israel.
Oh, Israel, that's right. In the next little while, you run a very busy practice. And you have your own grown children who all have their own support needs, and you've moved house. So tell me, Lyn, what's your top 5?
My top five fuels. Okay. I exercise. I like to exercise. I swim a lot, and also kayak. So I'll try and be kayak. I'll either do something probably for an hour every morning before I start work, it needs to be outdoors. And it needs to be with water. So that's a big fuel for me. I also have an elderly mum, and I know she's not going to be around forever. You know, it's okay. I do understand that she's 96, but she's an incredibly wise lady. And so I visit her in the mountains. So I go to the Oracle in the mountains once a week, and we go and have a coffee, and we talk about deep and meaningful things, and we share articles and read books. And she, you know, proofread my manuscript. And when I'm writing things, she'll often proofread those. So she's very wise, and oftentimes when I go up to her, there's other wise people who will come to see the guru in the mountains, the oracle in the mountains. So that's another area that I find really, really helpful for me. My family, I have 3 adult children. All of them run their own businesses. All of them, one's a social media guru, and he's just on fire and absolutely loves helping people to connect, particularly around breast cancer awareness. So he's amazing the way he does things. Also, I have a son who's an architect and builder, and he runs Sago Network and builds composting toilets in New Guinea and Africa. So that's pretty cool. So I'd love to sort of get around and talk to him about what he's doing. And I have a daughter who's a PR guru as well. She runs a fantastic company called Kabuku PR and does a lot of work there. And so oftentimes when we're together, we don't necessarily talk business, but we are very linked in terms of our, our values around what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's not necessarily philosophically we're all linked. It's the process of connecting people. That's probably our big theme in all of us. And also I have an awesome husband. We both share a lot. We're real partners in what we do. He's complete opposite to me. His personality is shy, quiet, withdrawn. He's a leader. And he leads from behind, whereas I do pay attention to me sort of stuff. So we're, one extrovert and an introvert. He's a leader of in education and runs 5 high schools at the moment. So he's quite amazing, but he leads by empowering. So between, all of those things, is that 5? You count my 3 children as 3? Maybe not, sort of.
You can count it as family, or you can count it as 3 if you want to. It's up to you. Is there another one you'd like to kind of add? Is there another type of fuel source?
Yeah, the other fuel source is that in my work that I think links between the Resilience Centre and the Resilience Doughnut. We have there's 4 women, myself and 3 other women. Actually 4 women, 5 altogether, we call ourselves the Bletchley Circle. Did anyone watch that series, the Bletchley Circle? It was these amazing women, and there's actually a movie or a series on the ABC that's run it, but it's actually a true story. And these women were spies during the Second World War. And then when the war finished, they had to go back to being housewives because they weren't supposed to work. And so they got together, and it's in the town in Bletchley in the UK, and they got together and they solved crimes, post-war crimes or ones that were linked to war. And these women were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. One has a photographic memory, one has one is an incredible mathematician. So I actually have the Bletchley Circle. I have 5 women who are brilliant, and we get together. When we actually get together, there is these skills that I just sit there and think, oh my goodness, they're so smart. Sometimes I shouldn't speak so much because I think they're smarter than me. And that's the important thing, is if you really want to do well in business, you employ people who are way smarter than you and sit there and learn from them. And we have a really good team. I think probably in terms of business, they are why we're doing so well.
Fantastic. As I suggested, there are lots of other topics I would love to cover, and I would love to have you on our podcast. The particular topics I'd love to talk about are attachment, child development, and a little bit more around the parenting side. So I look forward to being able to do that with you in the future. However, I think this evening we've been able to give people a good summary around resilience and suggest them how that can fuel them up, and how that can help them to be a more resilient person, and what that will result in the growth of themselves and their business. So thank you very, very much for joining us on this evening's 7-day Business Fuel Challenge. On the printable that people have got, interestingly, there's 5 spaces there, and for people who are looking to try something where they can add in a fuel source, Lyn, and some of the other fuel sources are things like nature and journaling and sunlight and being asleep by 10 p.m, laughing. Did you have a laugh today? So it's a bit of a checkbox exercise, and people can grab the printable from our website, from our RebeccaNewmanOnline.com.au website. If you hit the Count Me In button on the events page for the challenge, we'll send it to you. And I'd propose to people who kind of aren't sure about their fuel that perhaps Doughnut Moments might be a fuel source you might like to add, and bring some awareness to how this might be a fuel source in your life and what it actually feels like, especially if sometimes you just feel like things are a bit icky. It can be a nice tool to actually reflect on when something's just not right, and there's that intuition that's plugging in. I think it can be a really nice way to reflect, and it gives you a very simple framework to reflect around, even though there is amazingness that sits behind it in terms of how the brain does all its work as part of a donut. So I encourage people to do that. And that will draw us to a close this evening. So if you haven't already, please jump on our website and we can send you the full schedule. We have 5 amazing people tomorrow talking business, talking why yoga is nothing to do with prancing ponies, talking self-care, and actually why self-care is not selfish and in fact essential. And then, of course, we round out the session with chatting with our amazing health mentor for the Grow Project, Anthea Kalouros, and we're chatting about all the different challenges people face, and in this Business Fuel Challenge we're going to pick a bit more of Anthea's brain as we have in our other 2 sessions. Thank you again, Lyn, for joining us this evening, and I look forward to continuing our conversations as we always do. Thank you for joining us so closely to Moving House as well, and we will be in touch again soon. That closes out this evening's session of the 7-day Business Fuel Challenge. I hope it's provided you some insight that will put some fuel in your tank. Please do visit us at RebeccaNewmanOnline.com.au and check out all the amazing events we've got going on. We've got our 1-day Grow Lab coming up. We've got our Grow Lab experiments coming up, and lots happening. So we would love to be in touch with you. There is also plenty of prizes and freebies for anyone that has counted themselves in for the challenge. Of course, you can follow our journey and see what inspires us and allows us to get a lot done in our day, allows us to be salmon swimming upstream, as Lyn and I often speak about, those leaders in business who often feel like they're that way. So you can follow our journey of the Grow Project on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. And until then, ciao for now. Bye, Lyn.